Hello, it's Neal Romanek from the Flint. Welcome to the Flint Podcast. And this time we've got Alf Lawrie with us, who is formerly head of Factual Entertainment at Channel 4 in the UK. Hello, Alf.
Hi there.
And we were just talking before we went on about you are taking a long break from what has been a very busy few years. And I know as head Factual at Channel 4, you were doing a lot of great sustainability related, green, if we're going to call it that. I guess maybe we'll try to find a name for it as we talk here. But content and programming that was really, I think, pretty groundbreaking, or at least it's different from what a lot of other channels were doing. So maybe we could start by talking about your time there. Like what happened when you came in? What was the sort of state of talking about sustainability in broadcast when you arrived?
Yeah, I mean, my angle is climate change around sustainability. And I was doing Factual Entertainment, and it's a big department which makes all sorts of things like Married at First Sight and Gogglebox and Bake Off and all sorts of things that have nothing to do really with the environment. But I became increasingly sort of conscious, actually through Extinction Rebellion, funny enough, that I was doing nothing whatsoever to contribute to the sort of problems that the world is obviously facing. And Channel 4 is next to Westminster. And if you remember Extinction Rebellion, I think it was 2019, basically shut down Westminster. They occupied a bridge. And I was walking through them every morning to Channel 4. And they'd had all these signs, and they said the greatest threat to the world is thinking someone else will save it. I remember that was a good sign. And I'd sort of think about these signs. And I started to think, well, actually, what am I doing? I haven't really thought about this stuff at all. And I started thinking about it and looking into it, and then became increasingly alarmed in a way about the fact that, I wasn't alone. Pretty much the entire broadcast media, with the exception of certain news outlets. Channel 4 News is amazing and covers it extremely well. And Natural History Department at the BBC has been amazing at raising awareness to some degree, although controversial, amongst actors. George Monbiot said that David Attenborough was, I think, done more harm than good. So, by his silence on some of these questions. So, there's controversies around all of this, but essentially I felt that broadcast media really wasn't addressing it with the gravity it deserved. And I started trying to just do my own little bit to get involved. And that meant commissioning Joe Lycett versus Shell in the first instance. And Joe looked at Shell's greenwashing, which is fairly prolific. I mean, obviously they're posing as sort of saviors of the planet currently, which is very arguable. Say they're going to be net zero by 2050, or they said then. I think they might be rowing back on some of that stuff now. But but I was aware, making that it's fine to throw rocks and criticize corporations, but in a way the big question is, well, what are we actually going to do differently? And the fact is, fossil fuels obviously underpin our whole lives. I drive a petrol car. I fill up at Shell garages, and I actually read the defense Shell made in The Hague when they were taken to court by the Dutch. And they said, look, why are you blaming us? Like, we're a law-abiding company. We're just doing lawful activities. If you don't like what we're doing, shut us down, right? Go to government, people who you should be complaining to, not us. If we just stop making oil, someone else will down the road, right? Unless you ban this activity. And I sort of thought, well, yeah, logically, that's a completely reasonable argument, actually. And probably, expecting people to just stop lawful activities en masse, individually, company by company, person by person, isn't probably going to be the way we solve climate change. And the more one looks into it, the more horrifyingly complicated one realizes this issue is. But fundamentally, I think there is an acceptance now that the emphasis on the individual, which has been very strong in broadcast media, you do your little bit, do this, do that, has probably been misplaced, because it's let off the hook the kind of people who have responsibility for the system.
Hmm.
And ultimately, if we want to fix climate change or stop it or slow it, governments around the world will have to act. You know, the British government, but in concert with the Indian government, the Nigerian government, the American government, the Chinese government. And it's at that level that the problem ultimately have to be tackled. Anyway, that's all a bit daunting. But we commissioned a season of programs last year on Channel 4, trying to raise awareness of facts. Climate season. It was called Change Climate, I think. And the centerpiece was called The Great Climate Fight, which Keo Films made. And the presenters of that really challenged the government over the discrepancy between their claim, which is that they are utterly committed to net zero and well on the way to it, and what their own advisors tell them publicly and privately, which is, no, you're not going to get there, and you're not on course for it at all. And there's quite a big gap there. And the government keeps saying there isn't a gap. And the presenters were saying, no, there is a gap. And Hugh Fernie-Whittingstall at the end sort of accuses Rishi Sunak actually of lying very directly. No complaint was ever received. No denial was ever issued. No letter came into myself or Hugh sort of taking us to task for that claim. And the point was to try and give a vision to viewers a bit of what a net zero society looks like. I mean, if you read certain sections of the media, net zero is like this horrifying project, you know, this absolute dystopian, totalitarian, awful, despotic sort of conspiracy. That's one narrative. But there is another narrative, which many people believe, and they seem intelligent people who've thought about this a lot, which is that it could have all sorts of benefits, right? I mean, less polluted cities, obviously stopping climate change, but other benefits as well, economic benefits, environmental benefits. And actually, the vision of a net zero society has many charms, some argue, right? Lower utility bills, sustainable energy independence. So the idea of that series was to sort of give a voice to those who think that net zero actually isn't a terrifying and wicked project, but is one that we should be pursuing even apart from climate change. But obviously it has the added value that it fights climate change. And allied with that, we had a film from Chris Packham, which really was arguing about the limits of protest. And ultimately, if the issues are political, then really the citizens' greatest impact is in how they change politics, whether that's at the ballot box or protesting, and that film explored that. So that was the idea of that season. Yeah.
That is, there's a few things you said. First of all, you were saying you're talking about the important thing for you was climate change and not sustainability.
For me personally, I mean, obviously it's all good, but you know, that's my focus.
But what we just because we always use the term sustainability, and I'm like, I have no idea what that word means. I'm saying sustainability all the time, no idea what it means at all. But so is there a when you say that, first of all, it might be interesting to hear what you think the word sustainability means, because I'm not sure what it means, but also how you kind of focus on, you know, sort of one area of the problem versus like, you know, all the other sort of maybe bits you can get distracted with. And also, actually, you were talking about that. You're talking about that climate change focus, and then it actually ends up having all these other benefits, which spin off in other areas anyway.
Well, all of these things are universes, aren't they? I mean, sustainability is just like this whole galaxy of different projects, and within that you have climate change. But climate change is a massive spectrum of activity. The people who are fighting climate change, you know, are on such a wide spectrum, and the people at this end. So you have the people who, for example, think we should abolish capitalism, and capitalism is the enemy of the climate here, right? And the way to fight climate change is to get rid of capitalism. But you also have people over here who think capitalism can be the answer, and green growth and all of this, right? And they are very opposed, but they are actually, you know, good faith actors who spend their life, you know, thinking about and trying to fight climate change, right? But that's in itself a very broad, complex issue to get to grips with. Sustainability obviously takes in a whole range of other debates and problems and So when I'm saying, I mean, I'm just looking at climate change, I mean, it's still quite complex, but you can't do everything. I suppose the reason I sort of draw the distinction though is I would end up on a lot of stuff. Green is another word, right? Things are green. I would end up on green panels, or people would talk about green programming. And basically, I think in certainly broadcast media, people tend to conflate green programming with anti-capitalist, anti-consumerist programming, where someone lives off grid or cuts down on their lifestyle dramatically. You know, Ben Fogle goes and meets someone living, you know, on a desert island. That's a green program. And that's all well and good. And I mean, I'm not in any way, I think
So
that's
it's often
great.
very craftsy.
Well, it's crafty and it's anti-consumerist and it's anti-capitalist, and I'm not in any way against that. But what struck me as I went deeper and deeper into the climate change debates was that there is a huge school of thought who think that that probably isn't the way to tackle climate change. And the problem has been that in the sort of mainstream media, the two have been conflated. If you want to fight climate change, you know, go live in the woods and go off grid. That's how you fight climate change. And obviously, if you read the Climate Change Committee's report, right, the advisors to government who've set out this very detailed pathway to get to net zero, it actually involves very little going and living in the woods and living off grid. It's actually about rewiring our electricity system so that it runs on sustainable energy. Wind farms onshore and offshore, you know, solar farms and all the rest of it, nuclear. And it involves rewiring our homes and getting heat pumps instead of gas boilers and all sorts of things. But it's not about going and living off grid. And green, in the public's mind, often is conflated with that. I personally think that is dangerous for us to make that equivalence and could be harmful, because I think for most people, if they're offered the choice of do nothing, carry on as we are, business as usual, or we have to all go off grid and abolish capitalism, personally speaking, this is a personal view, I think most people would say, look, let's just keep going as we are. That sounds too difficult. And part of the aim of the season, actually, and I think ideally broadcast media will become a bit more sophisticated in communicating some of these messages, but it's to say, okay, you have these two ends of the spectrum, but there are also, you know, if going off grid and abolishing capitalism is a bit much for you, there are these other people who want to fight climate change, who think we can do it, you know, through existing capitalist structures, but it involves divesting from oil and gas. It involves building these alternative energy supplies. It involves rewiring and insulating our homes. And all of that is within capitalism. And that is not a business as usual model, right? It's a radical model. We're not doing it at the moment, but it's a model that they believe the UK could do and that other countries could do as well. And some are ahead of us and some are behind us. And it's a model that in theory, you know, internationally, we're kind of signing up for. But the problem is, no one's quite walking the walk, right? They meet at COP and they sort of talk about it, but few countries are actually going for it. And anyway, the point being, green is very broad. I think it's very dangerous if we just tell the public that if you want to stop climate change, you have to abolish capitalism. I think that is a harmful message. Now, it is the view of some, right? And I'm not saying they're wrong. I don't, you know, I'm just saying there's a debate here, and we need the public to sort of carry it along in the debate a bit more.
Yeah, well, it's like you know, oh, I can barely get the recycling out. I've got to abolish capitalism now. That's just
Yeah, tough.
It sounds like a lot of work.
It sounds tough. Yeah.
So then in kind of bringing those ideas into programming, how did that kind of start? And what was I guess maybe what was the track record of Channel 4 previous to that in terms of how climate change had been addressed, and then maybe some of the newer things that you were doing?
Well, Channel 4 obviously had a notorious contribution to this debate a decade ago when it published I think it was The Great Climate Swindle or something like that.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Denying that climate change was happening. So until relative recent, that was our main contribution.
What was that in? What was that its own show, or was that part of a
It was a
magazine
documentary.
show? Oh, was it? Okay.
Documentary is a 90-minute documentary, which I think the data rapidly became superseded. We say. I think increasingly there are very few people now who will seriously stand on a platform and tell you climate change isn't happening. Now the debate has shifted to, well, it is happening, but how bad is it going to be? And you get some people saying, well, 2 degrees could be okay, and whereas other people say 2 degrees will be really bad. But very few people say, do you know what? It's not going to warm at all. But that is kind of where we were at 10 years ago. And then the BBC make incredible programs about the fact of climate change, right? And I think have done an amazing job of educating the British public about the fact of climate change. So polls suggest most people know climate change is happening, right? There isn't much doubt about that. And most people know it's quite crap. They'd rather it didn't happen. It's not like it's a good thing, most people think. So that has been hammered home. What nobody knows really is what to do about it, right? That's the big $1 million question. And the public at home don't know. And as I say, have sort of got vague ideas that, XR or radical activists are the solution. And some of them are down for that, but lots of them aren't. And so apathy and avoidance is then bred by just thinking, Christ, there's just no answer to this, how depressing. And they move on. So I think the BBC have done a great job of talking about the problem. Channel 4 haven't been in that space very much at all, because for all sorts of reasons, it's hard for commercial broadcasters to, there's many calls, public sort of calls on our time and of sort of worthy subjects that aren't necessarily going to just drive huge audiences in themselves. And commercial broadcasters have a limit of how many of those subjects they can sort of tackle at any one time. And climate change, I think had sort of fallen reasonably low down the agenda. There are all kinds of other social issues that have been big over the last few years, obviously, and rightly so. That those other issues have been important. So it had sort of fallen a bit to the bottom of the agenda, I think. And then actually, I think Extinction Rebellion did have a huge impact on Parliament. It was in the wake of that the House of Parliament announced a climate emergency. And I think in the wake of that Theresa May passed her net zero legislation, which is kind of seismic in its implications. And I might be wrong about the chronology of that, but certainly they declared a climate emergency after XR. And then broadcast as a whole got together and said, Christ, we need to be present on this. And there was something called the Climate Content Pledge, which was signed in 2020.
Sure.
I think.
That Albert had put together.
Said, yeah, right. So that was quite an amazing piece of orchestration behind the scenes, really. And so since then, we've all been acknowledging we have to do something on this. And it just so happened at Channel 4, I was one of the people who sort of, leapt into that challenge with gusto.
So did the Climate Content Pledge kind of help propel that a little bit, or was that just kind of one more thing that was like, well, I guess we really got on it?
I think they're useful, those things, because the thing is now,
because it's not binding in any way. It's just kind of like, we're going to agree. We're just kind of do it.
Well, it's reputationally binding, isn't it? I mean, they've all made undertakings. So it just gets a bit embarrassing if they're on a panel in 2 years' time and you say, what have you commissioned? And the answer is nothing. It doesn't look good. And those things sort of do actually focus minds. So I think, if you're in favor of climate change programming, I think that was a good thing to have made happen. Because just at a basic level, important people who run TV channels don't like going on panels and then being slightly embarrassed that they haven't done what they said they do. And so I think it was helpful. And certainly in the wake of it, various things have been convened and commissioners meet regularly. And it's not acceptable now to sort of say, we're not that interested. Like, no.
Yeah, the audience doesn't want it. We're not going to.
You have to be seen to be interested. How you turn it into commercial TV is hard, right? I mean, one of the issues is obviously that people find it very depressing. They are scared. They think it's a serious problem. They don't like it. But like, because there's a lot of defeatism and gloom and you know, justified sense of powerlessness, in the sense that no matter what the UK does, ultimately the UK can't stop the world warming, even if we all did some amazing action. I sort of completely understand why people might not think it's entertaining to sit down for an hour and watch a program about climate change, right? So for the most part, if you say this is a program about climate change, people will avoid it, really. And that is a massive, massive, massive challenge to trying to educate people on the subject or give them new information about it, right? It's really hard. And the season we made that I commissioned, I completely stand behind, because I just think you need some programs of record. Like if you want to know, are we on track for net zero, or what does a net zero society look like, or what does the climate change committee say, how should we get to net zero, like that exists. There's nothing else I'm aware of that is like it, and someone can go look that up and teach themselves in a very accessible way those issues. It reached, I think, in the end 1.2 million. We got an incredible response back from it. So the mailbox was sort of honestly unprecedented. It was extraordinary. Now, whether those are people who are already super engaged and just grateful to see finally something addressing this on screen, because it's not addressed very much, or whether it's people coming to it new, I don't know that. Overall, we did some studies, and the main point of the season does seem to have cut through, right? There was also a very profane trailer. I don't know if you saw it, but
I
it was,
oh yeah, on the the guys on the getting on the plane. That
yeah,
was amazing. Yeah.
So I mean, that was very polarizing, and you know, again, the mailbox on that was fairly prodigious.
Yeah, that was
But
dynamite.
what the point of the season actually was basically to say, look,
So just sort of say,
individual,
can we say what can you sort of talk about what the trailer was?
yeah, that, I mean, the trailer is lots of people who have power. So it's heads of oil companies, and it's politicians, and very, you know, wealthy businessmen, I guess, pretending to care about the climate, and claiming they care, but in private not caring. And I can't quite remember how the link we made, but anyway, we demonstrate their lack of care by they all crap their pants and sort of dance around in very unfettered fashion. And the slogan was, "You're worrying about your carbon footprint, but what are they doing about their carbon skid mark?" And
Right.
the point, obviously, was to
With the
say the
skid
people
mark being very oil, like essentially like oil in
exactly,
there. Yeah. So,
exactly,
yeah.
yeah. And it was incredibly graphic, and
And
they
very
all.
funny.
Oh, thank you. I mean, like I said, it did polarize, but I'm glad thank you for saying that. And the point of the season overall was to say, look, it's not actually individuals just voluntarily and in a well-meaning way doing stuff at home that's going to get us out of this, right? I mean, no one thinks individuals can shorten NHS waiting lists, you know, or sort of sort out the West Coast train line problems, you know, and they're not going to sort out climate change either. I mean, it needs political will and political solutions, and people with power have to engage with this for real, not talk about engaging with it, but actually engage with it. So that was the point of the whole season, the point of the ad. And actually that message did cut through. So our polling showed that even people who didn't watch the program, you know, they saw the ad or whatever, or they heard about it, you know, many, many millions of people sort of got that vague sense that, yeah, someone has pointed out this is political. And for me, that's an important message and a worthwhile message. But as I say, individual programs on climate change tend not to rate well. And that is a challenge for broadcasters. Like when you're thinking, what are you going to put out next? Explainers on climate change is not really what the public want. There was a very successful show that Specialist Factual, another department at Channel 4, made called Guy Martin's Great Power Trip. And I don't know if you know Guy Martin, but he's a wonderful presenter and he has a huge loyal following. And actually, he's a racing bike driver. And his following basically a petrol heads, you know, amongst others, but it's not your typical sort of woke climate change like warrior at all, the opposite. And he has a wonderful following. And basically, this series was a 3-hour kind of fetishization of sustainable technology, because he loves technology. And so he flew out to the wind farms, which, you know, in the North Sea, I mean, they are jaw-dropping, just extraordinary. These behemoth, as far as the eye can see, these spinning turbines, you know, just remorselessly generating energy. And he went and studied the capacity problems and looked at Scottish lakes, which are starting to be drained up a hill so they can drain back down. And he got into all of that side of it, came in as his entry point. But along the way, of course, the whole subtext is this is like, well, the question is this the future? And he was saying he can see how it is the future and it has to be the future. And he was kind of educating people about, yeah, this is how a government, if it actually wanted to, could take us off fossil fuels and put us on this stuff with these lakes draining up and down, these turbines and what have you. So it was in its own way a brilliant exposition of systemic change, and obviously the individual can't do any of that. It is literally people in charge who have to make that happen, but it's in their gift. And again, the polling on that showed that, I mean, that did very well. That got over 2 million views, I think. And again, it's sort of the influence of it spread somewhat. And so people are waking up, hopefully, to the fact this is a political issue. But I mean, you know, it's baby steps, and there's a lot more to be done on that. And realistically, and I think this was Albert's big thing, was climate change has to be tackled in all kinds of ways, not just confined to programs about climate change. And I think that's right. My personal beef with Albert a little bit at the time, and, you know, just generally around this area, is that I feel like the easy, low-hanging fruit is to say, you know, people want to feel like they've got agency, and so let's not scare them too much by making it all seem too big. Let's just tell them about the stuff they can do, so they can recycle and they can drive less and they can change their diet. That's all great. Of course, we should tell people that. But when we tell people that, when we imply that's actually how we fix climate change, I actually think that's harmful. And in the past, I've felt our industry has veered a bit too much on the side of like false reassurance, false optimism, make the problem seem small enough that it's not going to worry you too much.
There's a kind of worry that you're going to depress people and they're going to be inactive. So you're going
and of course you have to give them hope. I just think misleading them about the scale of the issue, or misleading them about where the answer is to be found, is wrong. And somehow we have to find ways as creatives to make entertaining programs that read as entertainment, but that also show you where the solutions are. And that, for me, that's why the Guy Martin piece was an interesting piece. It didn't say it was about climate change, but it was about climate change.
It was about cool kit.
It was basically about cool kit, yeah.
So I mean, are there things that you have seen that kind of common threads that you see have worked with that? I guess that idea of a single personality that people can relate to, or that they trust. So like thinking with Chris Packham, for example, or that, you know, I know that guy, trust that guy.
I mean, look, I personally think that the problem, it's quite deep, right? This is quite a hard issue to tackle, right? Because the reality is there isn't consensus on how to fix climate change, right? So the stuff I'm talking to you today about, the Climate Change Committee's agenda, right? Which is a very credible, internationally respected agenda. It's been put together by thousands of people, ultimately, indirectly advising. It is internationally renowned, and it's a serious piece of work that talks about how to transition a society net zero. Many, maybe the majority of environmental activists don't like it. They think it's too soft. They think it's too much, too capitalistic. They think it's not ultimately green enough. And as I say, there's this broad spectrum of thought and you go along the road to, you know, abolish capitalism, and there's all sorts of hues in the middle. And I'm not, who am I, Alf Lawrie? I don't know. Maybe the CCC is wrong. Maybe that's not strong enough, right? Or maybe they're right. And that's the problem, mate. It's very hard for me to know. It's very hard for any of us to know. There are these different voices. I think George Monbiot is an extraordinary journalist, extraordinary thinker. He spent his life in this. He thinks the CCC are pretty crap, right? As an example, right? So here's two, say the CCC and George Monbiot, right? There's two different prescriptions here about what to do next, and they're not compatible. So it is hard as a program maker to simplify this complexity and make it intelligible to an audience. But notwithstanding that, you have this problem of the subject matter is inherently complex. That makes it hard for us, the sort of gatekeepers in commissioning, right, who commission stuff, to commission sensible things about this that are worthwhile. There isn't enough understanding of this complex debate amongst commissioning. And then we have to commission the programs, and then finally people have to make them, and then they have to get watched, right? So there's this whole chain. In my personal opinion, there is an education piece amongst broadcasters and creatives. It is very hard to write an amazing drama about, for argument's sake, this sounds boring, but you know, just as an illustration, updating the national grid, right? As you know, as the backdrop to your incredible drama. If you don't know that updating the national grid is potentially part of what you need to do to fight climate change, right? In other words, if you're a playwright and the only things you think fighting climate change is about is like recycling and you know, going to the jumble sale for your clothes, that's what you're going to write stories about. But that's not going to help the bigger education piece. And there isn't enough awareness amongst broadcasters and creatives of this debate, this complex debate, that we're engaging with it often enough, meaningfully enough. And so for me, there is an education piece in the industry that needs to happen.
So how do you do that? That sort of, I mean, do you sort of talk? Do you bring in ideas? Do you bring in new writers?
Albert have been helping with that, haven't they? And Gabby at the BBC is amazing. I'm sure you know her, convening. Yeah, sure. You know, she convenes regular educational pieces for commissioners, which I think is a brilliant thing. And Edinburgh TV Festival, they've got a climate content summit on June the 5th this year. And that's all in the spirit. There are scientists there and commissioners, and it's in the spirit of educating. So I think it's happening, right? I do think it's happening. It's just unfortunate. It is a really complex subject. I mean, I've been going at it now for about 4 years, like quite hard. Like I've talked to a lot of people personally about it, and you know, the reality is, you know, it's so enormous that I can't speak with any authority about. I can tell you different opinions. I'm not equipped to judge between them, and it's genuinely very difficult that there is so little consensus about the way ahead. But I think creatives can get deeper into that debate and start picking their own sides of it, then that will start to come out on screen. You can't write an amazing drama about the post office submasters if you don't even know that's an issue, right? And that you know, that was on screen about 4 times before the ITV drama, you know, and it was like current affairs films and different news items, and you know, it never rated. It was never that exciting. It just popped up. People sort of, oh, okay, moved on. And then radically retreated. It's suddenly become this national talking point. And so in my mind, you know, maybe optimistically or whatever, but I'm hoping this rather arcane, challenging, difficult, knottily complex area of climate change, the science of it, can percolate enough down to playwrights and drama and documentary producers and commissioners that one of them will have a twist and a creative angle on it, and you know, the sub postmaster version will come like that, where people watch it and it's massively popular and massively informative about this complex subject, but in a way that people respond to emotionally and want to watch and engage with. And so that's the hope. But Yeah, that's my personal hope.
But is there something in that about the, kind of you're kind of out of you move away from the realm of facts and informing people to almost like morality and empathy and those kinds of things. When people see that drama, for example, um, they maybe see an impact that you don't get when you just get a whole bunch of facts laid out in front of you. I guess you could also see that in documentary, but maybe something that is engages people in a moral way. I don't know how to put it, kind of
I think moral is
any better
dangerous.
than that. Yeah, moral is maybe not the right
Emotional,
word, but
definitely. Emotional, 100%. And not intellectual. I totally agree with that.
yeah.
And I
But
mean,
there is a sense of like this is maybe moral is not the right word, but like this is wrong and I need to do something. It's there's something that it creates discomfort in you, that there's a again, I'm
well,
going to say a wrong that needs to be righted, but it's
yeah,
not just something that I've just had an emotional experience. It wasn't that okay.
no, definitely. I suppose my only slight quibble would be I feel like we have, as an industry, and particularly mostly thanks to the BBC, um, drawn people's attention to the wrong. Like, I do think most people know and feel acutely climate change is terrible, and they're aware it's a bad thing. And like news now, all news broadcasts do a very powerful job, too powerful, according to people who are more relaxed about climate change, of linking extreme weather events to climate change. And so I do think I personally think people are primed. Like, I think if you said to people, push this button and we can fix it, like, most people would push it. But the problem is there isn't the button. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know what they're supposed to do. And they sort of are aware that in a world, obviously, where other economies do dwarf ours, that our agency is limited. And so pretending otherwise, I think, it disengages them more. But somehow showing them some sort of pathway. And in my opinion, all we can do is try and put Britain on some sort of pathway towards net zero that seems attractive enough that other countries, think, yeah, I'll do that. If we want to fix this thing, that's the only way I can see it happen. Is someone will do it. I mean, it might not be the UK first, but if you want to fix this thing, wouldn't it be great if it was? But countries will get genuinely onto pathways to net zero. And the agency of individuals within this country, of citizens, yes, you play your part through behavioral change, but mainly is through engaging as a citizen. And at the moment, there is no heat around this issue for parties, because nobody really knows what net zero friendly policies look like. All parties say, the Green Party and the Tories both say they're committed to net zero by 2050. And so how do you know who is and isn't? And it's very hard at the moment. There isn't that knowledge to be able to distinguish. So there isn't really much electoral pressure to actually get on a path to net zero at the moment.
Do you think is that not to get too conspiratorial, but do you think some of that vagueness is intentional? And also, I guess maybe there's the bigger question of that, it's not just a neutral. It's not like you're just walking into a library and looking at your information, and there's a whole storm of disinformation and bad actors out there that intentionally try to so obviously, especially online, but try to kind of disrupt the information space. So it's hard to.
There's a huge debate, and what is very difficult is being accurate about the future. And so, as a broadcaster, we can't be partisan. We have to be duly impartial, right? So it's not for me to just conjecture for viewers about this is the path to net zero as a Channel 4 commissioner. You can't do that. You have to be duly impartial, and there is a legitimate debate. And when people say 2 degrees centigrade might be okay, well, maybe it will be, right? I mean, that is a point of view, and some people are saying that. And broadcasters,
but it won't be okay though.
well, That's your
We
opinion.
assume.
My point is that
Mm,
these are matters of legitimate debate. And
mm,
that's where it gets complex for broadcasters in particular. Newspapers can be very partisan, right? The Guardian has been running amazing stuff in the last couple of weeks on this subject. I don't know if
mm,
you've been following it. Equally, there are other papers which really obviously would appear want to undermine any sort of attempt to tackle net zero.
mm,
But
mm,
they're
mm,
owned by individuals and they can be partisan, and that's understood. Broadcasters have to be duly impartial. We're held to different rules. And because there is debate, not about the past, right? It's now acknowledged. We can all say climate change is real and it's happening. There's no debate about that. You don't have to have, both sides of that one. But when it comes to the future, obviously we do have to be duly impartial. I don't actually think that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing to be duly impartial and to recognize uncertainty, but it just makes it even more complex. And so I'm just saying, when you want to write and write around these and you kind of have to understand this complex debate to be able to accurately move forward and say things about it. And that's another one of the
mm.
barriers to creative entry. Yeah.
You sort of have to kind of know that to sort of know
You have to
the
pick
sort
your
of
way through carefully.
the
Yeah.
hurricane that you're walking into,
Yeah,
as
you
it were.
do. And
Yeah.
that makes it extra complex. It's just an
Mm,
extra barrier. There are some debates which are very intuitively right and wrong and relatively simple. When you
mm,
look at them, this issue about blood transfusions at the moment, you don't have to spend years to understand it. Unfortunately, climate change is annoyingly for everyone is a bit more like that.
mm,
And
mm,
and with 1,000 voices and 1,000 experts, it's very hard to know, well, who's right when they disagree. And it's very hard, it's a challenging subject,
mm,
but
mm,
so it takes more work. It's more labor intensive than other subjects, unfortunately.
mm. Well, that's great. We're coming kind of up, I think, close to our wrap up. What are you going to do now? You finished at Channel 4
Yeah.
and you're going to chill out for a bit and
I'm going to have a sabbatical. I'm continuing
yeah.
to sort of think about climate change and how it can be sort of tackled on screen. But yeah, I'm also thinking about a whole load of other projects and yeah, just see what happens next. Enjoy freedom for a bit.
It's amazing. Good. Well, I hope you have lots of inspiration amid those quiet moments.
Yeah, thanks. And very nice to chat to you. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alf. I will remind everybody that you should be signing up to the newsletter. Go to the Flint .media, sign up to the newsletter there. Thank you so much, Alf, and I hope we can talk to you again.
Great stuff.